Stable Diffusion is like a pretty big topic, right? But like all things, YouTube is a phenomenal resource. My first rec to anybody who wants to get started is, go to Google and search for getting started with Stable Diffusion. And beyond the YouTube videos that'll come up, there's plenty of how-to articles step by step, mostly around getting set up. The setup can be a little challenging, I think, to non-technical folks if you're trying to run this on your local machines. A lot of it has to do with the amount of horsepower you have, what your GPU is, and so on. Good news is there's other places to run it. I'm on a Mac. Macs aren't terrible, but I definitely don't have a high horsepower GPU to crank on with this stuff. So I offshore rendering to other services like RunPod, which I'll talk about in a minute. To get into YouTube specifically, I would just search for Stable Diffusion tutorial, and there are just thousands of these, and it's really well done. Everything from using hosted solutions to the whiz-bang underpinnings of SSHing into your instance and installing your own stuff, and that's a progression. So I'd start small and probably learn how to use the tool first, and then start to consider running it locally so that you can sort of innovate a bit and take it in interesting directions. One of the channels I've been watching quite a bit lately, specifically when it comes to model training, is under the account SE Courses. And there's a guy here that does all kinds of really in-depth step-by-step tutorials around creating models, but more than that, he's got getting started tutorials as well that span between Stable Diffusion 1 and SDXL, which is the most recent release, and how to use these things. So I definitely point to this one as being one of my favorites. Now, as it comes to like Stable Diffusion in general, I think for folks who are like literally just getting started, I kind of think about like web developers as a corollary. So when you first start out building websites and web apps, you probably go to a no-code solution like a Webflow. And I kind of correlate Midjourney with the Webflow of Stable Diffusion, right? It's super easy for beginners. It's consumer grade within Discourse. It's super easy. You're just prompting, right? So I think that's a great starting point. If you've never made generative outputs or AI art before, start to tinker with Midjourney. You'll start to realize and learn how prompts influence outputs. It's really great for like quick outputs, or maybe if you need a one-off output, where raw Stable Diffusion and using a tool like Automatic 1111, which I'll show you, the difference is that's more like knowing and learning JavaScript and being able to create your own web apps at the code level and do essentially anything you want. Stable Diffusion is going to provide you with Automatic 1111, and raw Stable Diffusion gives you tooling to create consistent outputs. And that's the core difference. Midjourney is just going to take your prompt and output it. They've got some remixing capabilities where you can in-paint and stuff now, which is really great. But ultimately what you can't do is take an image off of your machine and replicate it. You have to generate one first from Midjourney before you get access to any other tooling that they provide. And so it's not really suited for folks who want to use this in their arsenal for creating assets that are on brand, consistent across many, many versions of them, because you're going to get different outputs every time on Midjourney. The sort of go-to Stable Diffusion framework, let's call it, is Automatic 1111. And this is an open source package, provides many tools, but the go-to is their web UI. And it's really soup to nuts. Using this package, you can install this locally, really regardless of machine. Outcomes will vary based on what kind of machine you have, but in general, you should be able to run this. It has tutorials on how to do so within the README itself, though it can be complex if you're non-technical. The notion of like running a Docker container can be a little daunting. I would recommend asking ChatGPT for help, for sure. There's some great plugins on ChatGPT. One is web requests. So you could give it the link to this and say, how do I do this on machine XYZ? And it'll walk you through those steps. So don't let that be a blocker for you. They also provide a list of online services here as well that they recommend. To make this simpler, there's another package called Stability Matrix. This one's really cool. You can install it, and what it'll do is basically acts as a wrapper and an installer for lots of different flavors of UI and apps built on Stable Diffusion. It includes Automatic 1111, Comfy UI, and so on, which really are just different ways to accomplish the same thing. So I definitely recommend Stability Matrix for one-click install. And it's also got some really great features like browsing models from Civet AI and just one-click install, which I'll show you a bit of that here in a second. The other thing is there's some free hosted solutions out there that you can use. One I would point to is Google Colab. And so the last Ben user on GitHub is kind of leading the charge on a lot of these packages for sure. But he's built something called Fast Stable Diffusion, which is a Google Colab notebook that you can simply just install and start running. And it looks kind of like this. So I'm actually using Google Colab here to run Stable Diffusion. It's not as robust as, say, like an Automatic 1111 will be running the web UI, partly because you don't have a lot of control over this, but it is a way to do, simple generation, without a lot of headache. Automatic 1111 looks like this. There's a little bit of a learning curve here, just sort of orienting yourself to this UI. But once you get it, you start to understand sort of why it's set up the way it is. But in general, it's just a big aggregation of all the tooling you've installed in different tabs. And so my Automatic 1111 may look different than yours because this is totally customizable within the settings side. We start here at the UI side, and then we can essentially replicate this exact function that I'm doing via an API call. Another spot to check, if you want to do quick gens for free or for cheap, just ad hoc, Hugging Face as well. So Hugging Face spaces will let you run Stable Diffusion in a space and or just test out different models that are available within their model section. Again, folks who build these UIs in Hugging Face spaces may not give you full control. Like there's only a few inputs here. Of course, I don't have the access to the full kitchen sink like I do within a full install of Auto 1111. Next spot I would go if you start to climb the ranks and realize maybe you need more horsepower in your machine like I do, I'd point you to runpod.io. This is a GPU cloud, so I can spin up servers and install Automatic 1111 or Comfy UI and even just raw PyTorch or whatever you want on ephemeral machines. So you can pay by the hour, you can go serverless and sort of pay by use. You can pause them at any time if you're not using them, which is great. And here's just an example of that. So I can go into my community cloud, I can pick what type of instance I want to run based on the GPU I want. This is my typical go-to is the 3090. I like the mix of power with 24 gigs of VRAM and RAM, 4 CPUs for like 34 cents an hour. And what I'll do is kind of pad up my account, run this for as long as I need, and then I'll pause it. And then you just pay a very minimal storage fee, a penny or so an hour to keep it sort of warm for you when you come back to turn on your GPU. And what's really neat about RunPod is if I wanted to spin up a new version, I can go ahead and click deploy, and they have templates here. So maybe I want to run Comfy UI, right? Comfy UI is a little bit of a different take on Stable Diffusion. I'll go ahead and just start one here. We'll come back to it. Once you get everything installed and running, what then, right? You're clearly going to tinker with it. You'll likely, when you install, only have a couple models, probably the 1.5 pruned model, i.e. that's the Stable Diffusion version 1.5, and you'll probably have the SDXL base, which is the XL version of Stable Diffusion, their new release, which supports bigger models, right? More vibrant outputs, but you probably want to go further than that. And so the next resource I'd point you to is Civet AI. It is a bit of a marketplace for models, specifically for Stable Diffusion. It's really well built. It's got some growing pains, but it's been a go-to resource. And there's not much like it out there, save for, let's say, Hugging Face, which you kind of have to know what you're looking for to find the right model over on the Hugging Face side, which is still a great resource, but not as like consumer friendly as Civet AI. Civet AI has all kinds of models. Checkpoints. So think of checkpoints as being like a full-fledged model you would run in Stable Diffusion. That's up here in the left. So much like the ones that come out of the box, you can install others. Rev Animated is one that's done very well for me. Really highly used, highly reviewed. And so this is what this model can do. It's very realistic, but it can also do some great cartoon or 3D based renders, also very photorealistic. So kind of a good catch-all. Civet AI also supports other types of models like LoRa, as an example. Again, LoRa is that sort of lightweight modeling based on styles, trained on images that you provide, along with captions that could describe how to prompt for it. So this 3D rendering style is an example of a great LoRa. When you come in here, every image that's generated, you can click on the little eye and it'll tell you exactly what the prompt was used, the negative prompt, the model, the rev animated, and the other sort of important settings within Stable Diffusion, specifically automatic 1111 if you're using that tool, to use in order to replicate that, including the seed. So this has been really, really helpful, just sort of ideating styles. Ultimately, though, you're going to pick a checkpoint. You can only run one checkpoint at a time, and you're going to start interweaving your LoRa's into your prompts. So the question becomes, how do I get LoRa's and checkpoints into automatic 1111? That's where extensions come in. So if you come into the extensions tab, you can come over here and go to available, click load from, and these are sort of the, I guess, blessed extensions from the community. And one of these I recommend is the Civet AI extension is what you want. When you install, you're going to get the Civet AI helper tab. And when it comes time to installing something new that you want to try out, all we got to do is take the URL, come over to Stable Diffusion, oops, wrong tab, pop it in here, we'll download it, and then we install it. So pick our model version and click download model. And depending on the size of that model, it might take a few seconds. If you're downloading full checkpoints, that can take longer, minutes, not usually much longer than that. And then as I go and generate stuff, I can come over here and click on my little red icon. That'll expand my model tab. I can go into LoRa and I can simply apply any of these. So like that 3D one I showed you earlier, just click it, it adds it. Now, one trick here is read the docs on the models you install. So this is the one I just used here. You'll notice that there are trigger keywords in order to actually have this LoRa sort of work, right? So that Stable Diffusion knows to use it. This one is 3DMM. So in order to use that one specifically, I'd also have to make sure in my prompt I've got 3DMM, and then that LoRa model will kick in. There's much more to it, obviously. The idea that you can change the weights of the impact that model might have, but that's probably future content that we can dig into. Last bit is, like I said, there's other forms of this. So that's automatic 1111. I just spun up a comfy UI example. Let's see if it, yep. So I'll go ahead and connect. I'm just using RunPod. Go ahead and connect to it. And here's my comfy UI. So you see it's vastly different. This one uses nodes and pipes, I guess you could call them, connectors to connect different steps in the process. There's mixed reviews on the UI. I don't hate it. It gets a little cumbersome when these flows get really big, but what's really great about comfy UI is this notion that you can continue on and create a very robust pipe where you're not just taking like the one-time output of a text to image like you would in automatic 1111, but I can take that image and I could continue on down the path and do something else with it. Maybe use animated diff to create a video using that image, or run it through an upscaler, or apply a control net to it, or so on and so forth. So different strokes for different folks, as they say, right? Different uses for these different tools. Comfy UI's learning curve is going to be much steeper than automatic 1111 because you kind of already need to know what the things do in order to sort of piece them together into something meaningful.